May 22nd, 2010. The north side of Mount Everest was howling that morning. Tents flapped like paper in a storm, ice cracked beneath heavy boots, and oxygen tanks hissed through the cold silence. Every climber up there was a veteran, battle-tested by years of pain, frostbite, and discipline, except one. He wasn't a guide. He wasn't even old enough to drive. At 13 years old, Jordan Romero stood at the edge of the death zone, where the air is too thin for life, and mistakes are measured in seconds. His small frame was buried under layers of downsuit and steel crampons, but his eyes carried the same fire as those who'd spent decades chasing the top of the world. Most kids his age were playing video games or worrying about homework. Jordan was staring into the frozen face of death, one step away from becoming either a miracle or a headline. Why would a child risk everything to climb the deadliest mountain on Earth? And who allowed it? This is not a story about fame or foolishness. It's about obsession, courage, and the thin, dangerous line between the two. Welcome to Ben Stories, where we bring you true tales from the edge of human endurance. Before Everest, before the death zone, before the world's cameras turned toward him, Jordan Romero was just a kid from Big Bear Lake, California. A boy who loved his bike, his dog, and the forest trails that surrounded his home. But there was something different about him, something his teachers and friends couldn't quite name. He wasn't restless in the way kids often are. He was driven. At 9 years old, a poster in his school hallway changed everything. It showed the 7 summits, the highest mountain on each continent. Below each peak was a name, and next to it, a number representing elevation. The highest, Everest, was so tall it almost touched the top edge of the poster. Jordan stared at it for a long time, tracing each mountain with his finger. Then he turned to his father, Paul Romero, a paramedic and adventure racer, and said, "Dad, I want to climb them all." Paul didn't laugh. He'd seen something in his son, a spark that felt real, not like a child's fantasy. He knew the mountains, knew their cruelty and beauty, and he also knew how quickly they could swallow people whole. But instead of dismissing the dream, he gave Jordan a deal. If you want this, you train like an athlete. No shortcuts, no excuses. And that's how it began. While other kids slept in on weekends, Jordan was up before dawn, hiking steep trails with a weighted pack. His stepmother, Karen Lundgren, an experienced climber herself, joined the training. Together, the three became a team, father, stepmother, and son, bound not by comfort, but by a shared pursuit of something extraordinary. Jordan's first summit wasn't Everest. It was Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, when he was just 10 years old. At that altitude, the oxygen thins, the head spins, and adults often turn back. But Jordan made it to the top. Then came Mount Elbrus in Russia, Aconcagua in South America, Denali in Alaska. Each climb hardened him. Each near-freezing night taught him that fear wasn't something to avoid. It was something to carry, like a second backpack. The more mountains he conquered, the more the world began to take notice. Articles appeared. Interviews followed. Some people called him inspiring, a prodigy. Others called his parents reckless. "He's too young," critics said. "It's dangerous, irresponsible." But Jordan didn't hear the noise. He heard only the wind, the rhythm of his own steps, the sound of his heart syncing with the pulse of the earth. By 2010, he had stood on 6 of the 7 summits. There was only one left, Everest, the crown jewel, the killer mountain. For most climbers, Everest is not just a physical goal, it's a spiritual one. It's where men and women have tested the limits of their faith, where dreams end in triumph or tragedy. But for Jordan, Everest was more than that. It was the mountain that would silence doubt, that would make the years of sacrifice mean something. His motivation wasn't fame or world records, though the media framed it that way. It was something quieter, a promise to himself. He once said, "I don't climb because I want to be the youngest. I climb because the mountains make me feel alive." His parents knew the risks. They'd lost friends to avalanches and altitude, but they also knew what it meant to deny a calling. Paul once told a reporter, "If I said no, I'd be teaching my son to give up on what he believes in. I'd rather stand beside him and keep him safe than let him go alone. So, as spring of 2010 arrived, the Romero family began preparing for the most dangerous journey of their lives. They chose the north route, from Tibet, a colder, harsher path with fewer climbers but more wind and ice. It was the same side where legends like George Mallory and Andrew Irvin vanished in 1924. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Reporters called it madness. Other climbers whispered about it in base camp tents. But when Jordan looked up at the towering wall of white and rock, he didn't see danger. He saw destiny. Everest had taken countless lives. Yet to him, it was calling. And when the mountain calls, the brave, and sometimes the naive, answer. In the frozen heart of the Himalayas, a 13-year-old boy stood ready to chase a dream no one believed possible, the youngest soul ever to set foot on the roof of the world. But no one, not even Jordan, could truly understand what it meant to walk into the death zone, where courage and consequence are often the same thing. Jordan's preparation for Everest wasn't about glory. It was about survival. Every ounce of his body had to be tuned like a precision machine. For months leading up to the climb, his days began before sunrise. Weighted sprints through pine forests, endless stair climbs, sleeping in a hypoxic tent that mimicked the thin air of the Himalayas. At school, he looked like any other 8th grader, except his backpack didn't carry books. It carried training weights. His teachers called him the mountain kid. His friends thought he was crazy, but he wasn't chasing approval. He was chasing control over fear, over pain, over the human limits everyone said he shouldn't cross. His father Paul knew Everest didn't forgive mistakes. Everest doesn't care how old you are, he'd tell Jordan during their cold weather drills. It doesn't care if you're strong, smart, or brave. It only cares if you're ready. To be ready meant enduring hell, in pieces. They practiced clipping and unclipping ropes in the dark until their fingers bled. Karen drilled him on avalanche signals, oxygen tank swaps, and crevasse rescues. Every muscle learned discipline. Every breath learned patience. But the real weight wasn't the ice axe or the crampons. It was the judgment of the world. In the months before their climb, the media exploded with criticism. Major networks ran segments questioning whether a child belonged on Everest. Psychologists called it parental exploitation. Mountaineering veterans labeled it a stunt. Even seasoned climbers warned, that mountain eats the experienced alive. What chance does a kid have? But inside the Romero household, the noise faded to silence. Jordan's father sat him down one night and asked, "You know people think we're insane. You don't have to do this. Say the word, and we'll stop." Jordan didn't hesitate. "I'm doing it." He wasn't reckless. He was sure. The certainty of youth, maybe, but also the calm of someone who had already tasted the edge of life and wanted to meet it again. Still, Everest wasn't just another mountain. It had its laws, both written and unspoken. The Nepalese and Tibetan authorities required all climbers to be at least 16 years old. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was protection. The youngest before Jordan had been 16, and even they'd barely survived. But Jordan found a way through the cracks. The north route from Tibet had no official age limit at the time. It was colder, deadlier, but legally open. That decision divided the climbing world. To some, it was clever. To others, it was forbidden, crossing a moral line that should have stayed untouched. But to Jordan, it was simply the path fate had carved. "If it's the only way," he said, "then that's the way." As departure day drew closer, the training shifted from physical to psychological. They studied past tragedies, the 1996 Everest disaster, the storm that killed 8 climbers, the stories of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine, whose frozen remains still haunted the slopes. Jordan knew their names like he knew his own heartbeat. They were warnings carved into the snow. He understood one thing. Everest didn't take sides. It didn't care who deserved to live or die. It simply tested who could endure. In late March 2010, the team left California for Kathmandu, then onward to Tibet. From there, the landscape transformed. Cities dissolved into glaciers, highways into dirt roads winding through prayer flag valleys. Each mile forward stripped away a layer of normal life. By the time they reached base camp at 17,000 feet, The air was thin enough to make simple tasks feel monumental. Breathing felt like sipping through a straw. Nights were so cold that water bottles froze inside tents. But Jordan adjusted faster than anyone expected. His small body seemed built for altitude. Efficient, light, steady. Other climbers watched him quietly, half in awe, half in disbelief. A child surrounded by death, smiling as if he belonged. Then came Advanced Base Camp, at 21,000 feet. Then Camp 1, Camp 2, and higher, each step carving deeper into the sky. They practiced moving in crampons across blue ice, setting anchors in brittle rock, testing oxygen masks under freezing wind. There were close calls. One slip on the North Col almost sent him sliding into a crevasse. Another day, a sudden gust ripped a tent clean off the ridge. Jordan didn't panic. He moved with the calm precision his training had forged. Fear is energy, Karen reminded him. Use it. Don't run from it. At night, they'd lie awake listening to avalanches thunder through the dark. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a reminder that nature held the real authority here. Some nights Jordan dreamed of falling, not the sensation, but the silence that follows. Other nights, he dreamed of standing on the summit, wind tearing through his hair, the world spread beneath him. Between those dreams lived the truth of Everest. Every climber arrives as one person and leaves as another, if they leave at all. By early May, Jordan had proven what few believed possible. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. His oxygen levels stayed stable. His focus never wavered. Even the Sherpas, men who spent their lives on the mountain, began to nod in respect. He was ready. And yet, somewhere deep inside, everyone knew. No amount of preparation could tame Everest. The death zone, that thin strip of air above 8,000 meters, doesn't care about age, skill, or heart. It only takes what it wants. Jordan was about to cross that line, the one few survive, and none forget. On May 17, 2010, the wind on Everest's north face went silent, a rare, dangerous kind of silence. It meant the jet stream had shifted. For a few short days, the summit would open, a narrow window when death paused long enough for the brave to slip through. Jordan's team woke before dawn at Camp 3, 27,000 feet above sea level. The tents creaked under frost, and their breath froze into crystals that drifted like dust. Inside the cramped shelter, Jordan sat cross-legged, tightening his crampons with shaking fingers. Every motion felt heavier, slower. Even zipping his jacket took effort, like lifting a stone underwater. He was small inside his down suit, a red and black shell that made him look more like a bundle of gear than a boy. But when he pulled on his mask and tested the hiss of his oxygen flow, his eyes showed no fear, only focus. Karen checked his regulator one last time. Paul placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "This is it," he said quietly. "Climb smart. No hero moves. The mountain decides when we stop." Jordan nodded. "Copy that." Outside, the world was blue ice and white emptiness. The climb from Camp 3 to the summit ridge would take over 12 hours, across a labyrinth of rock steps, razor ridges, and a final slope where one misstep could send a climber tumbling thousands of feet. Their headlamps flickered like stars as they moved upward in the darkness. The crunch of crampons on ice echoed through the frozen silence. Each breath rasped like sandpaper. The temperature hovered around 35 degrees C, with winds sharp enough to slice skin. At 28,000 feet, Jordan's legs began to tremble. His pulse pounded in his temples. His lungs burned. Every cell screamed for oxygen. Karen walked ahead, breaking trail. Paul stayed close behind, watching his son's every movement. "Breathe slow," Paul whispered through the radio. "In through the mask. Count it." Jordan obeyed. Step, count, breathe. Each movement was deliberate, mechanical, sacred. Hours passed. The sun began to rise, not gently but like a blade cutting through the clouds. The snow turned gold, the shadows vanished. For the first time, Jordan saw the world curve beneath him, Tibet to the north, Nepal to the south, the horizon melting into infinity. It didn't look real. It looked like another planet. But there was no time for wonder. Ahead lay the second step, a 100-foot vertical rock wall at 28,140 feet. It's the most feared section of the North Route, where climbers must ascend using an old, shaky ladder bolted to the rock by Chinese climbers decades earlier. Many turn back there. Others never make it past. The ladder clanged in the wind as Jordan clipped his harness in. His gloved hands gripped the cold metal. For a moment, he hesitated. The drop below was endless, a white void stretching into nothing. Then he heard his father's voice, steady but distant. "You've trained for this 1,000 times. Trust your steps." He moved. One rung. Then another. Then another. Each breath hissed through his mask. Each heartbeat roared in his ears. The world shrank to a tunnel. Hands, feet, rope, ladder. When he reached the top, he didn't cheer. He just looked down, amazed by the stillness. His body felt weightless, his fear replaced by a strange calm, as if the mountain itself had paused to watch. The hardest section was behind them. The summit lay within reach. But so did exhaustion. At that altitude, oxygen saturation drops below 60%. Brain cells begin to die, muscles cramp, the mind starts to drift, hallucinations, dizziness, confusion. Climbers call it walking in dreams. Jordan was slipping into that state. He saw flashes of home, his dog, his bike, the pine trees outside his window. He wasn't sure if he was remembering or imagining. "Stay with us, buddy," Karen's voice crackled over the radio. "Just a few more hours." At 8:00 a.m., the wind picked up again. Snow whipped across their faces, cutting visibility to a blur. Oxygen tanks hissed faster, masks iced over, fingers went numb. The climb turned from endurance to survival. Paul made the call. "We keep moving. No stopping in the open." Step by step, they pushed upward through the blinding snow until, at last, the slope began to level. Then, through the haze, the summit appeared. A small mound of snow marked by prayer flags fluttering in the wind. Jordan's knees gave out. He dropped to the ice, gasping. Karen grabbed his arm. Paul steadied him. Together they took the last few steps. And at 9 a.m. on May 22, 2010, Jordan Romero stood on the summit of Mount Everest. The youngest person ever to reach the top of the world. He didn't raise his arms in triumph. He didn't cry. He just looked out, a silent, wide-eyed child staring at the roof of the earth. His father's voice broke the stillness. "Take it in, son. You earned this." Jordan whispered through his frozen mask, "It's beautiful." They spent only 10 minutes at the summit, 10 minutes in heaven before the descent into hell began. Because on Everest, the top is only halfway, and every climber knows, the mountain never kills you on the way up. It waits until you're tired, proud, and heading down. The summit, for most climbers, feels like salvation. For Jordan, it felt like standing inside a fragile dream. One wrong move, and it would shatter. They took a quick photo, planted a small flag, and whispered a few words for all the climbers who had perished chasing the same sky. Then, the wind roared again, a reminder that their time in the heavens was over. "Time to go," Paul said through the radio. His voice was calm, but his tone left no room for hesitation. Descending Everest is often deadlier than climbing it. Your muscles are drained, your oxygen low, your focus cracked by exhaustion. Every step down is a gamble between gravity and luck. And on the north side, the side Jordan had chosen, there were no easy outs. As they began the descent, the storm thickened. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. The snow turned to a blur of white static. Their footprints vanished behind them. Karen led, carving a narrow path with her ice axe. Paul stayed close to Jordan, who moved in silence, each step trembling with fatigue. He'd been in the death zone for over 24 hours now. His oxygen flow sputtered, the mask freezing over again and again. He couldn't tell where the air ended and his breath began. "Keep talking," Paul told him. "Say anything." "I'm fine," Jordan gasped. He wasn't. At 28,000 feet near the top of the second step, Jordan stumbled. His knees buckled, his body swayed toward the abyss. Paul lunged forward, grabbing the rope line just in time. For a terrifying second, Everything froze, the boy dangling, the mountain howling, the void waiting. Then with a violent pull, Paul yanked him back to safety. "Don't look down," he said. "I didn't," Jordan whispered. It was half a joke, half a prayer. They rested briefly, barely enough to steady their hearts, then pressed on. As they reached the upper camps, the air thickened slightly, but not enough to ease the pain. Climbers descending from the summit lay slumped against rocks, some moving, some not. Their faces were masked in frost, their eyes open, unseeing. Jordan had trained for this, the mental armor, the emotional detachment. But seeing it up close was different. Death wasn't an idea here. It was a presence, patient and quiet, sitting beside every climber. One Sherpa passing by muttered something in Tibetan, a small blessing for the souls who didn't make it. Jordan mumbled it back under his breath, though he didn't understand the words. By the time they reached Camp 3, Jordan's oxygen ran dangerously low. He tore the mask off, gasping, his lips turning blue. Paul switched in a fresh tank, fumbling with the frozen valve. The hiss of new oxygen filled the tent, the sweetest sound in the world. They spent the night there, wrapped in silence. None of them spoke much. The mountain had taken what it wanted, their strength, their warmth, a part of their innocence. When they finally made it down to base camp 2 days later, reporters were already waiting. The story had spread across the globe. 13-year-old becomes youngest to summit Everest. Jordan was too tired to feel proud, too humbled to celebrate. He smiled weakly for the cameras, but inside he was still on that ridge, the one where death waited behind every step. Back home in California, life didn't go back to normal. It never could. For weeks, he woke in the middle of the night, heart racing, still hearing the wind. At school, classmates asked what it felt like. He didn't know how to explain. How do you describe standing above the clouds, gasping for life, knowing the sky could kill you? Some called him a hero. Others again called it reckless. TV anchors debated whether his parents had risked his life for fame. Psychologists analyzed his motivation. Mountaineers argued about ethics, responsibility, and the meaning of courage. Jordan listened to some of it, ignored most. When asked if he thought it was dangerous, he answered simply, "Of course it was, but everything worth doing is." A year later, the Chinese government officially banned climbers under 18 from Everest's north side. Some said it was because of Jordan. Maybe it was. But for him, the climb had never been about breaking rules or records. He had touched something eternal up there, something older than fear, older than human ambition. When he finally stood before a crowd at a school assembly, holding the same photo that had once hung on his classroom wall, he pointed to the tiny dot that marked Everest and said, "This mountain taught me that limits are only real if you let them be." The room fell silent. Teachers, parents, students, everyone seemed to realize it wasn't a child speaking anymore. Jordan had come down from Everest, but a part of him never really left. Because once you've stood that close to the sky, everything else, every noise, every comfort, every complaint, feels small. And maybe that's what the mountain gives you. Not glory, not fame, perspective. In the years after his climb, Jordan Romero's name became both legend and lightning rod. For many, he symbolized hope, the idea that a child's dream, fueled by discipline and love, could conquer even the impossible. But for others, he represented something far more controversial, the blurred line between passion and parental risk. Documentaries and editorials dissected every moment of his climb. Was it courage, they asked, or recklessness disguised as ambition? Psychologists debated whether the pursuit of greatness justified the exposure to death. Mountaineers argued that Everest should remain sacred, a place for those who truly understood its cost. But Jordan never joined those debates. He didn't need to. When asked what he thought of the criticism, he answered, "They weren't there. They didn't see what I saw." He spoke of the quiet between storms, of the humbling silence of the summit, of how small the world looked from 29,000 feet. He talked about fear, not as something to defeat, but to understand. In time, he turned his focus away from chasing summits toward helping others climb their own, figurative or real. He visited schools, led youth hikes, and told kids, "You don't need Everest to find your mountain." That message resonated deeper than any record ever could. He'd gone where no child had gone before, but the point was never the mountain. It was the belief that boundaries are only temporary, as long as the human spirit keeps rising. And so, the story of Jordan Romero remains both an inspiration and a warning, a mirror reflecting what happens when dreams meet danger, and when courage meets consequence. Because on Everest, there are no ordinary victories, only survival, and the lessons that come after. And as the wind still howls across its icy ridges, carrying whispers of those who never returned, one truth echoes louder than all the debates. Some climb to stand above the world. Others climb to understand it. Jordan did both. If this story moved you, if it made you question, wonder, or dream, then subscribe to Ben's Stories, where real lives meet the impossible, and where every tale reminds us, the edge isn't where things end, it's where they begin.